Well, we're almost done with law of sea, but I've received some questions related to a couple of issue areas, starting from the continental shelf. How come is that different than exclusive economic zone? Well, both of them are claims of the states. First of all, it's not automatic, it has to be claimed. Secondly, they also sometimes have certain economic or political implementations. Therefore, states opts for implementing either continental shelf claim or exclusive economic zone claim. And when continental shelf is claimed, the claims only cover the territorial part, not the sea block. What does that mean? The coastal state starts having certain rights over the sources on the terrestrial territory itself and the entire reserves down below. But it has nothing to do with the sea. The sea over the continental shelf is seen as high seas for the entire other nations. That's how it works. How about the air above the continental shelf? International airspace. It does not belong to the coastal state. The coastal state has only claims over the territory itself, the crust, not the block of water. All right? This is important. And in exclusive economic zones, then we can also talk about setting tribunes and setting wind farms and fishing as well. So, sea is again utilized by the coastal state and exclusive economic zone. So there is a slight difference. And the measurement is of course different, since you know. The measurement is 200 nautical miles for the exclusive economic zone. For the continental shelf, it's geography. It is a prolongation of the continent, and well, the geography decides where it ends actually, but the law sets a limit for that. Law says that the limit is 350 nautical miles maximum. So there are certain differences amongst them. Could I clarify all points that were in your mind, or do you still have questions related to continental shelf? Continental shelf claim is one of the claims of Turkish state in the Aegean problem. So therefore it's important that you're knowledgeable about that. And about high seas, once again, let's move to there. International waters belong to everybody. But this doesn't mean that everybody can do whatever they want to do. This only means that all states can use it for beneficial reasons. So all states can utilize it, but for the good of the mankind. And it is not a place where ships are free from all kinds of jurisdiction. That's definitely not true. First of all, we have said that all ships belong to certain states. They're registered by certain states. Therefore, we say flagship of Panama, flagship of Netherlands, flagship of Turkey. So it's registered somewhere. And the laws of the registered state also are valid for the ship when the ship is in the high seas. So whatever constitutes a crime in, let's say, Turkey, constitutes still a crime on the ship of Turkey in the high seas. That's how it works. International waters, of course, we're talking about a crime, and we need then security forces to observe the crime and to do something. And at that point, you can also say that, well, then who observes high seas? True, that's a huge question mark. Of course, the state can exercise its jurisdiction power over the ship when it hears about the crime. So when the crime is shared with the security forces or state prosecutor of that state. So if there's a fight on the ship, if there's a crime on the ship that one murders the other one, then definitely someone will make some complaints by the state, that's for sure. And if they give harm to the goods of other states, then this is covered by either state responsibility, depends on the nature of the ship, of course, or personal responsibility. So the damaged side is going to make, again, complaints. And oceans, high seas, are protected by international law. What if the damage is given to the international waters? That's a good question. How can we damage international waters? We can pollute it. We can unload certain materials that should not be unloaded in the seas, for instance. This can be one thing, and certain tests can be conducted, and so on. Certain tests are already regulated by separate agreements. Therefore, it's not going to be covered in this class. It's too much details, actually, for this moment. However, if certain damages are given, and if it is found out, then certain actions can be taken to punish the polluter, for instance, or to punish the ship or the owner of the ship or the state of the ship that has given harm to wildlife in the oceans. Do you know any famous cases where high seas are somehow polluted? Yes?
Wasn't the New Zealand case?
Yes, that's true. Do you remember how it was?
French warships were conducting military drills.
Oh, that one you mean. Okay, I remember another case related to New Zealand. They were famous for, I can't remember the word for that. Under the sea, there are so colorful rocks, and that's only one kind. That's true, corals, and they were damaged. But I don't remember who was in charge of that. What I recall is the Fukushima Daiichi case, actually by Japan. Japan was hit by a hurricane and then tsunami, and then a nuclear plant was damaged. As a result of the damage, leakage has started, and it still continues, unfortunately, since, I guess, 8 years. That has been so long. I tell you, I've seen people sharing pictures in Facebook of dolphins with 2 heads saying, magic of nature. Nuclear contamination, that's not magic of nature. That's unfortunately the nuclear contamination. And that nuclear contamination is recently found even in Californian wine. It is not even sea goods or fishes, but in wine that contamination is found. And what can be done against that? The leakage continues. You can read about what's happening in Fukushima Daiichi still on the webpage of International Atomic Energy Agency. They have a section called News, and there you can see the updates. Unfortunately, it cannot be stopped at the moment. The problems of the Earth are so big, and international law, international organizations, institutions, initiatives, regimes are still too weak to deal with them. But it is good to have them. It is at least a step towards solving it. And humankind is learning each time something negative happens, then we try to find out how could we have a better system, what could help us under such conditions. So it is good to have a system, but the system, be it international law, be it international organizations, institutions, whatever, is still not strong enough to deal with those problems. Therefore, at the moment, the oceans are still being polluted, and we don't have an effective measure against it. We have certain measures, but we know that some non-compliers are around, or certain damages are still being given with small consequences. I can't say no consequences, but with small consequences. They are happening. Well, about high seas. All ships have a lot of rights, a lot of freedoms. High seas are marked by freedoms. The thing is that what are those freedoms? We have said that the ship is already bound by the judicial system of its state. And the freedoms are, the most important one is freedom of navigation. So the ships are allowed to sail around in international waters. And the air above international waters are perceived as international airspace. Therefore, all flying objects, I mean airplanes and so on, have the freedom of overflight. Because international waters are open for all states, then states are free to lay submarine cables, fiber optics, or submarine pipelines. And they're all protected by international law. Why do we need to mention it? We need to mention it because we recall an event that has happened in 2015 when Russia was operating with its submarines in the high seas, and they were so close to fiber optics, international fiber optics. So rest of the world was thrilled if Russia is planning something like cutting off our internet or what. Well, they didn't do it. But the question has arisen then in 2015, what if they had done it? State responsibility steps in then, of course. So all those submarine cables or pipelines, they're not unprotected. They're under the protection of, again, international law. Artificial islands can also be built, can also be constructed in high seas. China does it.
Is it high sea in the Netherlands? They also build some islands.
I really don't know where they have built it, therefore I can't answer.
Because it's so close to their like other islands, natural islands, and it might be not overseas.
When we consider Netherlands, I'm not sure if it's. I need to take a closer look at this. I really don't know where they have been building, but I'm aware of the Chinese constructions that they have been constructing some artificial islands in the Yellow Seas.
But doing that, don't they obtain new additional territorial water?
The thing is that actually in this class I'm not quite willing to explain the details because it has many, once you start reading UNCLOS, then you'll see that there are many details related to that, like how big is that island, if it's going to be inhabitable or not, if agriculture will be possible, I mean what does inhabitable mean, and so on. Such questions have to be first of all answered, but for most of the time, they do not have their exclusive economic zones. They cannot claim extra things for them under normal conditions, but still things may happen. Freedom of fishing is there, but please don't take it as if it's an unlimited right once again. I mean, fishing can be done, but it is still subject to many other conditions and there are many other restrictions on behalf of protection of the wildlife in the oceans and high seas. And lastly, freedom of research. Freedom of research should still be respectful to the wildlife once again. It cannot be polluting, it cannot be giving harm to our oceans, international waters. So high seas are marked by freedoms. Keep this in mind. And those freedoms have their own limits. We have a question mark related to where do high seas end? Because of the Arctic region and Antarctic region, because those places are actually Antarctic and Arctic, both of them, there are gray areas around them, especially for the Arctic one. 3 continents are meeting there up in the northern pole. And because of the climate change, because of the global warming, what we know is that the ice layers are getting thinner. So what? What can this mean to us? Territories are changing, and what else?
International waters
Changing. what we know is that Northern Pole is a huge reservoir of oil. So if the ice is getting thinner, then the possibility of drilling for oil gets easier, of course. Therefore, nations have been making many claims. I don't know if I have it here. Yes. Russia has sent, first I called it, did we mention it in this class? Okay, well, it is not a scuba diver, it's not a human being, but they have sent a robot to plant a Russian flag on the seabed in the Arctic region to say that this part belongs to me. And those claims are not limited with Russia. Russia has just planted their flag over there for 10, 12 years ago, but Denmark has many claims. United States, they have many claims. Canada has claims. If I'm not mistaken, Norway, they also have some claims. Therefore, Arctic region, who does it belong to? Who has what rights? Where do the high seas end? Where do territorial waters begin? Is a part that is not clarified yet. You always keep in mind that international law and international politics intersect, and international politics give shape to international law. So at the moment, this is a gray area, but what you know is that there is a vast lake of oil under the seabed, and therefore states are making their claims already in order to control that energy source. The rivalry is continuing. Well, this is an international relations class, and you have been studying law of seas, and none of you are going to become sailors probably. Well, we're in Ankara. Why should you have learned it? Of course, you're learning it because many disputes are related to law of seas. I mean, we're in Turkey, and the most prominent one is found, the most prominent dispute is found in between Turkey and Greece. Turkey is not a party to UNCLOS, Greece is, and Greece has been setting their claims according to UNCLOS, of course. And Turkey is against that because when UNCLOS is implemented, then this is already a very narrow sea. And there are two neighboring states, and both of them have their security concerns, even though both of them belongs to NATO. I mean, they're NATO members, of course. They cannot make war with each other. Still, if UNCLOS is implemented, then the majority of the sea will directly belong to Greece. And 28% of the sea will remain for Turkey. So the part that remains for Turkey will be too narrow, and Turkey perceives it as a security concern. This dispute is not related to foreign ships. They already have their own innocent passage right. Therefore, the dispute is in between two states related to islands and the sea zones, territorial waters, and of course the airspace above as well. And airspace, as you know, it's not only navy and merchant ships and looking for oil and security on the sea. That's also something that applies to airspace and where the airplanes are allowed to fly. And those airplanes are not always commercial airplanes. What we're also talking about is military jets and so on. Therefore, they need defined borders to remain in the national airspaces, not to give harm to the airspace of another state. And this sea is not only full of islands where people can make homes on it or where people have been living on them since ages. There are some. In addition to that, there are also, you remember the cont'd story, right? So cont'd is a rockery. That's a very small, mini tiny island that's not inhabitable. It's not open for agriculture. But still, having this small island may also lead to many other claims. If we turn to UNCLOS, of course, inhabitable ones cannot have their own zones. But still, I mean, both of the sides have their own claims. Turkish claims rest upon mainly continental shelf and its security concerns. And one more thing, by the way, Turkey is not a party to UNCLOS and is not willing to sign and adopt it. Many other states are parties, and they have been regulating their relations with the sea according to UNCLOS. Each time a new step is taken, be it Egypt, be it Israel, so they're definitely not related to what Turkey is doing here. Each time they make a step in line with UNCLOS, Turkish Minister of Foreign Affairs is sending a notice to the United Nations saying that we do not recognize this step. Why so?
Because otherwise it can be become a custom of Turkish politics.
Definitely. Definitely, that's why. In order to prevent UNCLOS becoming a customary international law. Because if it becomes custom, then Turkey will be bound by the terms of that agreement as well. Therefore, Turkey shows that it does not agree with the implementation of this treaty. Another famous problem is what has been happening in Mediterranean for search for oil and gas. And this area is, according to statehood, already problematic area because of the Cyprus island that's divided in between Turkish part and Greek part. And first of all, its statehood is not recognized yet. Plus, in addition to that, how can they claim their territorial waters, contiguous zone, and then, of course, exclusive economic zone and so on. But in that point, Turkish claims are saying that we have a continental shelf over there. Then the other states, of course, ask Turkey, then why you have never claimed your continental shelf until now? And Turkish claims are, continental shelf is something natural. It was already there. Therefore, it was not necessary to claim it. It was already known by the geologists and so on. Therefore, there is no need to claim it. It is there. And the coastal states have rights over their continental shelves, especially for doing drillings for oil and gas. So again, we come across with some clashing views related to how to implement regulations on the laws. We don't read a lot about those problems in our newspapers, but once you're aware, you can start looking for what's happening because that's active. And recently, those states, Israel, Egypt, Southern Cyprus, Greece, and Italy, has made a plan like, first of all, extracting the oil, laying a pipeline starting from Southern Cyprus to Greece, and then to Italy, and then to Europe. But that's just a plan. And once you start Googling about it, then you can follow how it's being shaped nowadays. The Yellow Sea dispute is also approaching. Actually, at the moment, not at the moment, since a long time, we have that problem of Syria. If that problem had not arisen, then probably United States would have opted to move their troops to this part of the world, because they had already started making some maneuvers together with Australia and New Zealand, if you remember, but then they did not keep their focus on Pacific. What's happening there is that China has been building some artificial islands, first of all. Secondly, China has, well, in this map, we don't see them a lot, but there are numerous small islands over there. And those small islands, some of them are inhabited, and therefore China has certain territorial claims that overlap with the territorial areas of, be it Philippines or Malaysia or Vietnam. So China has been having some disputes with all those states, including Taiwan, including Korea, if I'm not mistaken. And the sources in the Yellow Sea are also emerging slowly. Therefore, in the future, we'll be reading about that dispute more. And now you have more tools to study this dispute.